Hello and welcome to the next session. And we're going to continue to make sense of this interior here and try to tweak it really, really well. And one of the things that I need to really stress is that all the stuff that we're doing here, it's really, a lot of it is kind of like guesswork to a certain degree because we can never really know the exact values of a lot of things. And it's important to also be really clear on like sort of like the style that you want to achieve. So when I googled for American diner interior, I found a lot of different things, right? So there is, for example, stuff like this. This one is actually an Unreal scene as well. I know this one. So maybe this is not like the most perfect example. However, there is obviously still a bunch. And one thing, they are really flat usually. So it's not that exciting to look at. They're flat, they're kind of boring to a certain degree. So we need to be really smart about how we want to do it and just the style that we want to go for. I think that this is kind of boring. And we can really again see like all these lights are pretty like blown out here and it's like very bright and flat. I don't think that's super much fun. So I think we should either go for something like this, which again is also very flat still, or I would actually really prefer to go for something like this. And this is quite interesting if we look at this, because what we can see here at the edge of the image is we do have these little lamps here. We can clearly see that the waitress is getting hit by some warm light. But looking here at the couch, we can also see it is not really super bright. So we can see these values here. We can try to like make sense of the balancing that they have. So here we can see these lamps are clearly off. So most of the lighting actually comes from all the neon stuff. So it's really interesting. Here again, we have these little ceiling lamps and we can see how much light they actually do. We can see how much light comes from this. So what we need to do is we need to sort of figure out a hierarchy of lighting. This one is quite good. Again, here we can see that we have these lights and they're not the ones that provide the lighting to the room, but they're the ones that just make it so these people can actually read the menu properly when sitting on a table. But most of the lighting comes from the neon stuff. I do like that look. So for now, let's just say we're gonna do something more like this. So this is what I will be balancing most of my stuff against. And if we like, so like now I've turned these lights off here, all right? So I'm just gonna take this, I'm gonna edit it, and I'm gonna turn on my point light here. And so the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fix all the placements here. Because as you can see, they want these lights where there's people. So like all this stuff, it kind of like does not make any sense. So let's fix it. We're gonna move this over here. We're gonna move this over here. And there's another cool thing that this brings with it, because like now that we're more in a corner, we actually do get more bounce from it because it's closer to any of the walls here. So we can actually use that to our advantage. So let's just continue here. I will delete these. And I just have to say it, but oh my god, I love real-time GI. Just looking at this, it's so nice. This is a really, really great thing to have. So we're just gonna continue here. We just make this proper. All right. All right, I think this is a good position, so I'm just going to delete all these ones here. And we're just going to do the same thing. Also, I wanted to quickly mention one thing, because you may have noticed I'm using point lights here, and I have the shadows turned on. So here's one important thing. First of all, like, I told you in the past that you never, ever, ever want to use point lights with shadows. And here's the thing. Traditionally speaking, that is very true. There are, however, exceptions. And there's basically 2 exceptions for this. Or let's say there's 3. So if you have like a specific scene, for example, someone's like holding a torch and there's not much else going on and you want the torch to cast shadows, you can do that, because this is something different than what I'm doing here for now, for example, where there's like a lot of point lights with shadows, right? So the torch situation, totally fine. Then the next thing is that Unreal has a technology that is called shadow caching. What is shadow caching? The reason why shadows are so expensive to cast is because they will basically be updated every frame. And as you may remember, one point light has 6 times the cost of a spotlight shadow. So it basically also has 6 times the cost of updating when things move or like whatever. And cached shadows is a really cool thing, because what cached shadows basically does is, imagine you cast the shadow and then you just hit like the freeze button, and then the shadow does not update anymore. It just stays the way. So it basically gets computed once, and then it never gets recomputed again. And the only thing that it costs is the memory that it takes to store the shadow map. So basically, like, let's say if your shadow map is 512 by 512 pixels, that is like, I don't know, 1 megabyte of texture memory. So you don't pay for updating the shadows, you only pay for the memory that the shadow costs. And that is pretty cool, because as long as no object that is inside the radius of the light source actually moves or updates, nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's gonna cost. And that is really, really cool and very beneficial to do. So with shadow caching, you can afford point light shadows, speaking of traditional shadow maps here, if you don't have the lights updated per frame and stuff moves. Because imagine I would now like animate all these tables and benches and they would like move around, then I would pay the update cost for all these lights. But right now I don't. So that is a way where you can still use point light shadows if your stuff doesn't update. The next reason why I can actually afford the point light shadows here in a pretty good way is because I'm using the virtual shadow map. And the virtual shadow map, honestly, I cannot completely explain to you how exactly it works. There is like some articles or like documentation for it. You can read into that in case you're curious. There's a bunch of things there. And if I understood correctly, the virtual shadow map is one big shadow map for the whole screen, basically, and every light just renders into it. And there is never a new shadow map. It's like basically an atlas shadow, and all the lights just render into it. So theoretically speaking, it doesn't really matter because it's sort of like tweaked in a way that the texture is updated anyways, and it's a rather large texture. So the amount of lights that render into it, as far as I understood, don't matter as much. I might be wrong about that. I may have like misunderstood, but that is what I got from it. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. Okay. So now we have this, and I do quite like it. So how do we continue from here? So first of all, I think for me it is often really difficult to judge the brightness of the light sources with like the difference between spotlights and point lights having different values and all that kind of stuff. So what I usually do is I work with the point lights because I feel that they're more accurate. Because with a spotlight, there's a thing where like the intensity of lumen changes based on the surface that is hit by the lumen. So like candela is a value that is independent from the angle of distribution, but we don't really get the candela values for the lights. So it is also not always optimal to use candela. However, what I'm trying to say here is that if I have the spotlight and let's say it has 2000 lumens and the angle is really big, it might not look as bright. But if I make the angle smaller, it's going to look way more bright because it's going to focus the energy of the 2000 lumen on a smaller area of like surface. So it is a little bit hard to judge the brightnesses of these with like spotlights. So that's why it can make sense to use the point lights instead. With that said, again, I don't think that these lights are as bright as the ones that we have in our living rooms. I think that these are more mood lights. They are a bit more doing jobs like this stuff here. So what I will do now is I will decide purely on my gut feeling that I will do 600 lumen on these. Okay. I'm gonna do it like this. And here's the thing, like, right, like even me, like I have done these things a while, like it takes me a while to nail exactly the value relationships that I want to have. So it's not something where I just enter it and then boom, call it done, everything is great, I'm happy, let's leave. So that is usually not how it works. It is a little bit of trial and error because it's a lot about the feel that you're trying to get. But then again, it is important to like check again with the reference because like one thing that we can also see in these examples here is that the neon stuff, it blows out quite a bit. So we can see that it's like white in the core. Like this is so overblown that we can't actually see what the sign is like reading because it probably has some more detail on top of here, but it's so bright. And in comparison to the exposure, we can't really see what's on here. And that is normal. So to make this look as cool as we can, we need to also reflect these things because I've seen it a lot that people are afraid to lose something, so they would like make the sign way too dark. But then it kind of looks wrong. It just doesn't look believable. So let's wait for the saving to be done. All right, there we go. So now we're gonna just go back to our exposure here again. And let's see how we can nail this in a proper way. I also want to do another thing quickly, which is rather interesting here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the point light and I copy it and I go out here. And this is actually kind of cool that we get this nice lighting effect here. Okay, it doesn't like doing that. Let's see if I can copy paste it this way. Nope, I can't. So let's do it quickly here. Put in the point light. Gonna switch it to lumen. I'm gonna do 600. All right. So this is the value that we have here, all right? And one important thing to note is that you can see we have, this is our light source, and we have a very, very huge radius, but our light actually doesn't travel that far. So one important thing to also figure out, and this is again, like it's for performance reasons, really important to do that. Per default, all the lights have an attenuation radius of 1000. So now I just halved it and I didn't really get a perceivable change because it seems like we're still not hitting it. If I would do this, you can see we would actually cut off the radius of the light based on the intensity. So this attenuation radius, this is like a value that doesn't exist in reality, because in reality a light travels as far as it can given the amount of energy that it emits. So this is purely like a thing that is meant for video game optimization. But one of the tips that I would like to give you is you always want to have this radius as small as you can compared to the intensity of your light. So having a 1000 doesn't change anything. 500, there was a tiny little bit here. 600. So I think 550, this is probably the perfect radius for this light without actually causing any light cutoff, and while still making sure that from a performance point of view, we are in check here. So I'm gonna delete this, and this was just for me trying to test because it's a bit hard to see in here when we have all these lights. So I'm gonna go to my point light, which is on the other screen here, and I'm gonna go 550. And so something changed. So let's look at what actually changed here. So, and this is really interesting because sometimes you may actually have another thing with the radius that is not so cool. So, not sure, I'm gonna do it again, and you see if you recognize what is actually changing. So what has happened here is that our specular highlights kind of cut off. And this is the second important thing to keep in check when you do your light radius. That is that the specula of the light cannot render outside of the radius. So if I do 200, you see how the specula from these lights back there is just completely cut off. Even though the lighting of these lights does not reach until, like, let's say here, if I put in the 1000 again, you can see that the specula reaches a lot further. So that is actually another thing that you can be mindful of. So there we just lost a bit by putting it, I put it to 800. I'm sorry, it's just like so much stuff on the screen, then it's better sometimes to tweak it on this side here. I could actually try to do this. Like this. So you want to always be very considerate of all these things. And we can also see here how the specular cuts off in the front. And obviously there's some lighting that's going missing. So since this is a portfolio piece and not a game, we're going to leave it at 1000 because it's going to look better. But if you have ever asked yourself the question on why, you know, you look at something on ArtStation, you're like, oh boy, this looks so good. Like, Unreal can do this. Why do games not look this good? Stuff like this is exactly why. Because, like, when you make a game, you just can't afford this. You may have to actually do this. And then you, like, lose some light here. You lose, like, a bunch of other things. There's just a lot of it that comes with it. So keep that in mind when you see stuff here. This is also the specular coming from the light sources back here on these metal beams. Again, when I put it on 500, you can see it completely disappears. All the readability disappears. So I'm actually curious what happens if I put 1500 here versus 1000. So you can see there's a lot of stuff that happens here. And this is purely specular because this is like all metal stuff. I think at least it should be, because if you do this, you can see, like, now I'm in the base diffuse lighting, you know, so like when I do this 1000 again, it actually does travel quite a bit. So here we have a point for making the radius even bigger, because it is more realistic this way, because light would travel that far. And again, so this is a portfolio piece, so we can do it. So I think that we are still a little bit too bright here. So I will lower all these lights to 400. I will go into this and I will just see how it looks on 6, but it's probably too dark. Well, I actually don't dislike this. Okay, so let's do this. So let's assume that this is our baseline now. And one important thing here, as long as we're not higher than 6 or 7, we are still in a good range for interior lighting. That is very important. So this is all right. We're not dangerously high or something like that. So this is going to work out quite well. And then also when we use spotlights, we need to consider that we need to have a lot higher values than this because of the nature of spotlights working a little bit differently, so to speak. So now we have this. So let's look at our neon stuff here, because I think this is going to be interesting. And I actually realized something when I did this stuff here. It didn't really use the stuff that I was putting in here, because I was using these ones. These are from like a parameter collection. So we can totally see, like, we have different base color here and the emissive color. So this is actually now kicking in the proper way here. So before that, it was quite off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go with something that is a lot more poppy here. So I'm going to really go with some full-on blue stuff. Whoops, of course with blue and not with green. So I'm gonna go with full-on blue, Same goes for this. All right. So now that we got this, one thing, we need to look here again, and then we can see, okay, so this needs to blow out properly. So we need to get it to look like this, right? And for that to happen, which it is absolutely not, we need to crank our emissive value. So if we look here, let's do like 1000, not there, 2000, not fully there, but slowly getting there, 5000. Now we're starting to look a lot more like what we see here, because we have the bright core and we have a nice blooming effect on the outside. We could potentially even do a little bit more. So let's just see. Let's do 7000. Let's do this for now. We can always adjust. So this was the blue. Now let's take the red here. Same thing goes for the red. We were using this color, so it got all borked. And here we're gonna do this. So we take full on red, and we take full on red. And we're gonna do this. So now we can see we have something that really starts kicking. And since we have blue and red, we actually start getting this nice purple light here. So looking at these, because I started reusing the same material here, I think I want to go back to 5000. Yes, this is a little bit more pleasing. So we're going to go back to 5000. All right. And with my red one selected, I'll put it into, like, I click the browse button, so it's selected. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it on all these meshes here. Right? So if I go in here, I'll just drop this on. And we can start seeing this becoming like pretty cool here. So let's do the same thing with the others. And I'm just gonna browse for the blue one. Now I have this selected and I can apply this. And again, this is the beauty of Lumen, because if this would be the old way of doing things, we would have to test bake this all the damn time to figure out if it's actually working, if the values are bright enough. There would be so much trial and error. Now the trial and error is rather quick, because we just set a bunch of values and then we balance them out and we just call it a day. That did not, like, this is not how it was back in the day, or let's say when I started. So now we have this, and it's starting to look actually quite cool here. So this is pretty neat. Now what I did was, because when I looked at this, I was like realizing, like, okay, there is a lot of these neon lights and things like that. So again, here is what I said when we started this. It's like sometimes you need to make a decision to change the content because you need more light. So here you can see that I actually have the same elements that I put here. Am I actually... Oh yeah, these are flipped. I need to flip them. So like I just copy and pasted this here quickly, but we'll fix that in a second. So I will apply all the colors first before I fix the rotation of the object. So okay, now it should be this one. Oh, sorry. This one is actually correct. It is this one that needs flipping. No, which one was it? This one is the wrong one. Yes. Okay. And this one. So we have this. Now, like one really important thing is that like you can see here how some of the lighting is kind of like screen space only. And that is that like small emissive stuff and so on, it can be rather tricky with Lumen. So, okay. Yep, that's going to be a bit annoying, but we're just going to select all of these. And there is something that I'll show you now that helps with the stability of smaller emissive light sources. By stability, I mean that it doesn't do like wonky stuff when things get out of the view or something like that, right? Just gonna select all these carefully here. So if we search for emissive here, we can see emissive light source. And when we turn this on, it'll help Lumen to sort of understand better what this is. And we can still see that we have issues with the reflections, but the lighting itself, you can see it stays really stable. I'm honestly not sure why we're having that much of a problem with the reflections, but there's the thing, like Lumen is still very, very new. There's a lot of stuff that is not yet, like, let's say, fully figured out with Lumen. So, you know, I don't know necessarily what's going on here. I will see if I can actually fit this in here. Well, kind of. No, it's not perfect, but it is okay. Good enough. Let's do this. Yo. Yeah. That is sort of good enough for me for now. I'm gonna bring this over here. And I just saw something funny while I was colliding the roof there for a second. Seems like there already was something like this up here, which is a bit hilarious. But it is what it is. All right. Cool. So we have this. Now, one thing that would probably make sense as well is to have even more of this stuff like over here. I would assume just by looking at some of the reference, right? So it would probably make sense to kind of like have stuff like this here as well. Also for consistency reasons. I'm not like trying to win like a beauty prize with this here. I'm just more or less like trying to... Oh. Oh no. This is unfortunate. So we have a little off rotation here. Let's see if we can get this fixed a little bit manually here. Probably like this or something. Let's see what happens when I do this. And again, like I'm not trying to win like a beauty prize here or trying to compete with my fellow environment artists. I'm just really trying to make this a bit more consistent here, which we can see I already kind of like borked this a little bit. So I think it would make sense to, you know, adjust these a little bit very slowly. But you know, this is the imperfection I was talking about. No, just kidding. But it's all right. It is all right. We'll live. Whoops. slow this down a bit. All right. So I think this does look pretty cool actually. So I'm just gonna do this nice round here. And then we should all feel really happy with what we have. Let's see. All right, this seems pretty well aligned now. And again, like I'm just repeating myself, but like this is the stuff where just when things don't look right, like add more lighting, like I'm doing here, like make it work properly, so it's all consistent. I'm gonna add a copy here as well, but yeah, this is just. I'm gonna actually take one of these for the other side here. But this is just one of these things where, like, if you want to get like consistency for your environment and stuff like that, these are the things that you kind of have to do so it just works properly. And also when you do stuff like this, like I would need to like go in here and add like weird kind of like fake lights or stuff like that, which again I'm not a big fan of. I don't really like doing it. I don't think it looks good either. So doing something like this is definitely the preferred workflow here. So we are slowly getting here. Actually, let's close this gap back here as well, at least from a logical point of view here. Let's just do like this. So it's gonna be fine. All right. So one thing that I feel like we're losing these meshes here over distance, and I am honestly, I think it might be because they're nanite actually. So let's have a look here quickly and see if they are nanite. Yes, they are. So here's the thing. Nanite does automatic culling and all that kind of stuff, right? So this stuff that you see back there, it's actually nanite trying to maintain the small stuff. So what I can do here is I can just select all these and let's see if that works. I hope it does. Otherwise I've been like saying weird stuff, but let's disable nanite. And it didn't actually help. No, because I know it has helped in the past with small triangles to stay visible. Yeah, well, tough luck, I guess. Again, it's still like, it's just very thin geometry. It might be the screen percentage as well. If we set this to 100, boom. Yeah, there we go. So it actually was caused by the screen percentage. So the screen percentage, not sure if you know, but it basically calculates things at a lower resolution and then scales it up. It can help to make stuff run better in the editor, but then again, when you have these very thin thingies and you have a not such a great resolution, this is what happens. So now looking at this and then looking at this, like we can already see that we are getting fairly close with a lot of the things that we're doing here. So that's actually really cool, and I think it's nice to see this also for yourself when you work on content and you do have a proper reference like this that you're working from. Like, it's so nice to actually see it and see how it comes together, how the colors start happening and all that kind of stuff. So that is really beautiful, and it's a lot of fun too. So one of the big joys of not only being a lighting artist, being an artist in general, is just when you see these things coming into fruition and the values matching up and all that kind of stuff. We can really see how the light colors here match really well. Also, like our warm light and all that kind of stuff. It makes sense. So it feels good. And one thing that does not feel good, and this is the last thing that we're going to do in this session, one thing that completely does not feel good, and it will actually get worse, I assume, if we add the lights back here. So let's do that quickly. I'll just like take this guy and we're going to copy it over. And we're going to rotate it by 180. So let's put this here. Okay. Looks good enough. I'm just going to move this in here. Again, no one cares about the perfect environment art right now here. And honestly, just need to say this quickly because this is so much fun. But like, I have been dreaming for this. Like when I started doing these things, like none of the technology was this far. So like I have been dreaming of sitting on my computer, copy pasting emissive light shapes and getting the lighting from them to actually do something. Like this is just like, to me, it's just like, wow, like this is amazing. Absolutely love it. So again, there's this weird thing when we look here where we can like, why is there so much light here, right? Like where is the proper shadow from these things, and why is it so bright inside here? And one of the things that we can do is we can go into Lumen Scene, and oh, we just suddenly see that the whole thing is not really there. So what is happening here, right? And let's try to find out what is happening here. Which one are we gonna, let's start with this one here. So if I open it, what is the culprit here? And I start with this one first usually, and it's this one. So we can see distance field resolution scale was set to 0. And as we've learned in the render scene for portfolio purposes with the floor, this is how we can actually disable an object to be seen by Lumen's lighting calculations or distance field lighting in general. So now that I did this and said apply, this is what we're getting. So I assume we should do the same thing with the rest here too. I'm just going to do this quickly off screen here. Apply. And are they all separate? Let's see. All right, that did a little bit here. Now let's look what we have over here. So that looks good. And now we do have a lot more occlusion here. So we still get this, and it kind of makes sense to a certain degree because like the light like going like this, so it's still gonna hit it. But for example, I think I'm not super happy with this guy here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna bump the resolution to 2. And we're starting to get somewhere. I'm gonna bump it to 3. All right, I like this a lot more. So what's with this table here? Gonna bump this one to 3 as well. And this is also like just a good thing to do in general. Is like when you have all these objects, just like do a little bit of a sanity check on the resolutions to make sure that they're properly reflected in the lumen calculations. Now we got this good stuff here. We could potentially increase the sign as well, just to make sure that it has better data to work with. So I'm just gonna do 3 as well here in resolution. This is more accurate. Good stuff. And then we can also see that there's a lot of like the small stuff here that is not really represented. Like this stuff here. And there can be like a lot of reasons for that. It could be that it's the size of the object. So if we look here, it is not visible anywhere. It's not visible in the lumen scene, the reflection view, the surface cache. It is just not there. And again, this might be due to some of the settings that we actually have in here. So if I go into Lumen Overview, we can see that like we can increase the detail for the lumen scene. And now the small stuff started appearing, right? So you can see how it really just starts having more of the objects reflected properly. We can also increase the final gather, which in theory should make it less flickering, but like you never know. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And also one thing is now my performance is actually quite a bit worse because also of me switching the screen percentage. So for now I'm gonna do this, and overall like we'll see how we go with this. So now we do have stuff here that looks a lot better than it did before. And we're getting somewhere really nice with this interior. So let's call it done for now. Let's make one last thing so we have something nice to look at before we call it off, because it's just always so much fun. I mean, we can already imagine how we could do some cool stuff if this was glowing nicer. Let's go somewhere where there's actually something on the table. So, you know, not nothing too fancy, but like, you see, we can do some pretty cool stuff already here. So again, I think we did quite well with this so far. So thanks everyone for watching, and see you in the next session.